Should the Raiders trade for Chris Olave? Let's break it down. There's been some buzz around the idea of the Raiders trading for Saints wide receiver Chris Olave, but does it really make sense for Las Vegas to pursue him? Let's start with this. Olave trade rumors have been circulating online, even though nothing has come from a credible source or from anyone within the Raiders organization. Still, the conversation has gained traction, especially on social media, which is why we're taking a closer look. Part of the reason these rumors exist is because Olave once mentioned during the 2022 NFL draft process that he'd love to play for the Raiders. His older brother is a fan, and that little detail seems to be fueling a lot of the speculation. But let's put things in perspective. The Raiders made some interesting moves this offseason at wide receiver. They added young talent like Jalen "Jack B" Guyton, along with rookies like Dante Thornton and others. This group, while not headlined by a star, has depth and upside. So why are big-name wide receivers being linked to Las Vegas? Well, it's not just Olave. We've seen names like Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen thrown into the mix. That kind of chatter usually picks up when fans or media don't fully grasp the team's strategy. In this case, the Raiders seem confident in the receivers they've assembled. Now let's talk numbers. Olave had strong performances in his first 2 seasons out of Ohio State, and typically, year 3 is when top-tier wide receivers start to break out. His production so far points to serious potential, possibly one of the better young wideouts in the league. But here's the real question. Should the Raiders actually trade for Chris Olave? From a talent standpoint, there's a lot to like, but realistically, a deal doesn't seem likely. There's no strong indication that Las Vegas is actively pursuing him, and it's unclear if New Orleans would even consider moving him. So unless something significant changes, a trade seems more like fantasy than reality. Bottom line, Olave is a talented player, no doubt, but when you look at the Raiders' current roster and team direction, the move just doesn't feel necessary right now. Why a Chris Olave trade isn't likely for the Raiders? Let's get one thing straight. The current Raiders regime seems pretty confident in the wide receiver group they've built. And honestly, that confidence doesn't always get recognized outside of the organization. If you're a fan who keeps up with the team, you've probably seen the Chris Olave rumors floating around and thought, here we go again. And you wouldn't be wrong to feel that way. The Raiders have already made several moves at wide receiver this offseason, and they like what they have. Jalen "Jack B" Guyton brings speed. Dante Thornton Jr. adds vertical ability. Kyle Phillips, who was Chip Kelly's first recruit, brings experience and polish. Tommy Mellott has shown real promise in the slot. And Trey Tucker? He's turning heads at OTAS with his toughness and energy. This unit might not have household names, but they're young, hungry, and developing well. That brings us to the core point. Unless this group struggles badly through OTAs and minicamp, where it becomes obvious by July that they aren't ready, there's no real reason to expect the front office to make a big move for a wideout like Olave. Now, let's talk about the cost. Reports say the Saints might want a day 2 pick, 2nd or 3rd round, in return for Olave. For the Raiders, that's tough to justify. They already spent a 3rd rounder on their quarterback. Doubling down with another premium pick for a wide receiver doesn't feel like a move this front office is ready to make. Even beyond the draft capital, there's the financial side. Olave's contract carries a cap hit of around $3.3 million this season. That's not bad. But with his 5th-year option already exercised by the Saints, the Raiders would also be on the hook for $15.5 million in 2026. So, if you're trading for him, it's not just about the next 2 years, you're likely committing long-term. That raises another point. If the Raiders are willing to spend that kind of money and draft capital, why not use it to lock in someone already on the roster, like Jakobi Meyers? Making a big trade could even create tension within the locker room, especially if it seems like outside talent is being prioritized over existing players. But here's the biggest issue: health. Olave has had multiple concussions already in his short career, and with the Raiders focused on building a tough physical offense, health and durability matter more than ever. You can't afford to rely on a receiver who might struggle to stay on the field. We've already seen how concussions can derail a promising player. Just look at what happened with Hunter Renfrow. That kind of drop-off is a real concern. Olave is talented, no doubt, but when you weigh the roster's current outlook, the trade cost, the financial commitment, and the health risks, it just doesn't add up. The health concerns around Chris Olave. There's no denying that Chris Olave is a talented receiver. He's looked sharp when on the field, and he's making plays in Carolina. But there's a serious concern that can't be ignored: his injury history, especially with concussions. Olave has suffered at least 5 documented concussions, one during his time at Ohio State in 2020 and 4 more since entering the NFL. That includes 2 last season, where he played in just 8 games. And that's just what's been publicly reported. If you've spent any time around football, whether at the pro, college, or even high school level, you know the number of actual concussions a player suffers is often much higher than what's officially listed. Multiple players have said the same thing. The number of known concussions is usually just the tip of the iceberg. So if 5 are on record, there could easily be more. With that in mind, and given the Raiders' push toward a tough physical identity on offense, it's hard to justify trading for a player with that level of injury risk, especially when the system demands durability, consistency, and a willingness to take hits across the middle of the field. For Olave's sake, you almost wonder if a different scheme might suit him better, maybe something less punishing. And sure, if this were Madden and you could turn off injuries, he'd be a perfect fit. But in the real world, the risk outweighs the reward for the Raiders. Kirk Cousins' update and why it matters. Sort of. Let's shift gears for a moment. There's been an update about Kirk Cousins that, while not directly related to the Raiders, could still influence the broader NFL picture. On May 27th, reports surfaced from Falcons camp. Head coach Raheem Morris said he hadn't seen Cousins at practice as the team kicked off OTAs. NFL insider Tom Pelissero confirmed that Cousins wasn't on the field. The speculation? Cousins may already be eyeing a move to a different team in 2025. Now let's be clear, this isn't about the Raiders trying to get Cousins. That's not the angle here. Las Vegas already has a better quarterback situation, and there's no interest in bringing in Cousins. But here's why it still matters. Cousins, whether you love him or not, is a starting caliber quarterback. He's one of the 32 best in the league, and wherever he goes next, he's likely going to make that team better, especially if they're a quarterback-needy franchise. He's currently in the NFC with Atlanta. The Raiders don't play the Falcons this season, and Atlanta doesn't play anyone in the AFC West. So as long as Cousins stays put, there's zero direct impact on the Raiders. But if he leaves Atlanta and ends up on an AFC team, or worse, lands on the schedule of one of the Raiders' division rivals, that's when it could start to matter. Quarterback movement across the league always shifts the balance, even if only slightly. So while this isn't a headline for Raiders fans to stress about right now, it's worth keeping on the radar as the 2025 offseason unfolds. Trade scenarios for Kirk Cousins and why it could indirectly affect the Raiders. Let's break this down. Kirk Cousins has a no-trade clause, but that doesn't mean the Falcons won't try to move him, especially if another team offers anything of value. Atlanta's front office may be ready to cut ties and escape what's quickly becoming a messy situation. Now, interdivision trades are rare. Teams don't like strengthening rivals. But if New Orleans made an offer, it wouldn't be shocking if Atlanta accepted it, if only to offload the contract and move on. That said, there are 3 teams outside the NFC South that make much more sense as potential trade partners. Let's start with the Cleveland Browns. Their quarterback room is a revolving door. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, ShedeurSanders, Dylan Gabriel. Deshaun Watson isn't expected to play this season, and if that's the case, Cousins would instantly be the most experienced and efficient option on the roster. Next up, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've been linked to Aaron Rodgers, but nothing is guaranteed. If Rodgers doesn't land there, Mike Tomlin and the Steelers could pivot to Cousins as a short-term starter. He's a solid veteran who fits their system and gives them a better chance to stay competitive in the AFC North. The third team? Indianapolis. Yes, they have Anthony Richardson. And yes, they brought in Daniel Jones as insurance. But Richardson is still raw, and Jones is Daniel Jones. If the Colts want to win now while Richardson continues to develop, Cousins gives them a proven option to lean on. Timing matters too. If a trade is going to happen, look to after June 1st. That's when the numbers start to make more sense for Atlanta. A post-June 1st trade would save them $27.5 million against the cap, while only eating $12.5 million in dead money. For the team acquiring Cousins, the 2025 salary would be $27.5 million. Starter money, no question. But his contract runs through 2027. The good news? It's relatively easy to exit the deal in those later years. Still, that cap hit, $57.5 million in future years, won't appeal to everyone. So what does this have to do with the Raiders? Well, any team acquiring Cousins is doing so with the intention of starting him. That means quarterback dominoes could fall, reshaping depth charts across the league. And while the Raiders may not be involved directly, these moves can shift playoff races, conference strength, and trade market dynamics. Ironically, Cousins' contract puts the Raiders' deal with Geno Smith into perspective. Smith's number looks a lot more reasonable by comparison, especially when you consider the Raiders got him without surrendering any draft capital. So the question becomes, where does Cousins land? Does he stay in Atlanta, backing up Michael Penix Jr.? Or does a team like Cleveland, Pittsburgh, or Indianapolis pull the trigger? Wherever he goes, the ripple effect will be felt, even in Las Vegas. How a Kirk Cousins trade could quietly shift the Raiders' season. It's hard to imagine many teams lining up to trade for Kirk Cousins at this point in his career. But if someone does pull the trigger, the real shift may not happen on the transaction wire. It may happen in the AFC playoff race. Right now, teams like the Browns, Steelers, and Colts aren't seen as real contenders. Not with their current quarterback situations. Cleveland has a broken rotation, Pittsburgh is leaning on Mason Rudolph or a backup plan, and Indianapolis is putting their hopes in a raw Anthony Richardson or a recovering Daniel Jones. But insert Kirk Cousins into that equation, and the outlook changes. Cousins may not be elite, but he's a stabilizing presence. Put him on the Browns, and suddenly that defense has complementary offense. Slot him in with the Steelers, and you've got a team with enough balance to make a run. Hand him the keys in Indianapolis, and the Colts become much more than just a rebuilding project. Why does this matter to the Raiders? Because Las Vegas plays both of those teams this season. Week 5 at Indianapolis. Week 12, home against Cleveland. 2 games that currently look winnable on the Raiders' schedule. 2 games that could swing dramatically based on where Cousins ends up. Let's be honest, there aren't many matchups on the schedule you can circle and say, that's a win. But right now, both the Colts and the Browns are vulnerable. No quarterback continuity, no offensive rhythm. That gives the Raiders an edge. But trade Cousins to either of those squads, and that edge disappears. The margin gets thinner. Suddenly, what felt like a favorable slate starts looking like a minefield. Especially when you scan from Week 13 through Week 18, where the schedule stiffens into a stretch of relentless matchups. So even though Cousins isn't coming to Vegas, his destination still matters. It matters because in a crowded AFC, one player can tip the scales and force the Raiders to fight even harder for wins they thought they could count on.